geology, hydrology, but probably more importantly, psychology. Because if you can keep people focused, as they have predominantly been in the money pit, when quite possibly the treasure could be secreted somewhere else, that person is an absolute genius. I want to thank you folks for coming today. I hope I've shown you that there is more to Oak Island than just the money pit. This is a massive engineering work. A group of individuals went to a great deal of trouble to bury something of great value to them. Now, we do have a guest book back in the Interpretive Center. We do appreciate your comments. So if you enjoyed the tour and you do this as a total waste of your time, my name is Charles. But if this is 2 hours plus of your life that you're never going to get back, my name is John. So we're going to head back now. Now over to my left here is Lot 25. And Lot 25 is very interesting because during the American War of Independence, the British governor of Virginia, the Earl of Dunsmore, issued a proclamation granting freedom to any male slave who would fight on the British side against those rebels, either in the British Army or the Royal Navy, and many did, hundreds and thousands maybe. And in fact, some of the other British governors of colonies did the same thing. Now, one of the individuals who answered the call was Samuel Ball. He was barely a teenager when he escaped from the Ball plantation in South Carolina, basically with the clothes on his back and maybe a few crumbs of food. Made his way to Virginia and enlisted. Now back then you could be a cabin boy on board ship, maybe work in the galley. In the Army you could possibly work in the camp, or maybe be a drummer in a regiment. At first he was transferred to New Jersey under Major Ward, where he cut firewood until he was old enough to fight. And he did. In fact, we believe that this is where he actually met Daniel or Donald McGinnis, because they were both in the Army together. And we believe they were involved in a battle, a number of battles, but one in particular when the British were taking back islands from the Spanish in the Bahamas. Now, when New York was evacuated in 1783 by the British, Ball came with a number of Army units and United Empire Loyalists to a community down by the end of the province called Shelburne. However, all the black Loyalists, and this is where we think he was mustered out of the Army, but the black Loyalists went to a community outside of Shelburne called Birchtown. Right? They built a really incredible museum down there. In fact, Carly Moore, she's kind of the boots on the ground for the owners when they're not here, right? And she handles all the permitting, all the stuff that you don't see on TV, all the background stuff, right? And does a lot of office work here for them. And then in Traverse City, they have someone who does it also there. So she and I went down to Birchtown to visit the museum down there, and I took what I had on Ball and spent the afternoon visiting with them and seeing what they had. And we know through Ruklowski's work that Ball stayed in Birchtown for 2 years. He comes to Chester, and then a year later, he buys Lot 25 right here for £8 Now that would have been money he would have saved from his service in the British Army. So for a 4-acre lot, a little over 4 acres, right? Lot for £8 he probably could have bought 125 acres on the mainland. So here's your first question: why? Possibly it could have been his friendship and association with McGinnis, because Ruklowski also discovered McGinnis's will in the archives in Halifax. And Ball was a witness to McGinnis's will. And back in those days, you just didn't pick somebody off the street and say, "Hi, can you witness this for me?" No, it didn't happen. It just didn't happen. It was always a family member or a trusted friend. Right? It just was. So that's where we think they may have formed an association in the Army, and then it lasted through their lifetime. Now, eventually, Ball owns 9 lots on Oak Island, over a quarter of the island. So 24, 25, 26, 6, 7, and 8, 30, 31, and 32, which is farther down. Now, we do know through Dan Blanketip's research that on lots 31 and 32, he grew cabbage to sell to the people of Tancook, because they're very famous for making Tancook sauerkraut. And from South Cove, it's a straight run, right out to Big Tancook and Little Tancook. Right? Well, we don't think he made his money there. We think he may have found something. Not it, but something. In fact, one of the few things that the late Fred Nolan and the late Dan Blankenship did agree on, and believe me, it wasn't much, was that there's not just one treasure site on Oak Island. Maybe there's 12 to 15 treasure sites, some of which may have been found, but very small ones. Right? Possibly one by Ball, one by Anthony Graves, because there's stories of him in the 1840s, 1850s, going to Mahone Bay and buying his supplies with Spanish silver. And also the Vaughan family. Now the Vaughan family were involved in Oak Island both directly and indirectly from the beginning right up into the mid-1860s. And they're just a hard-working farming family. That's all they were, right? Now, if something would have been found, they would have got a share. But all of a sudden, boom, they got money. And they had a lot of it. And if they didn't find something on Oak Island, they found something somewhere else. They set a lot of their family members up in business and with homes. They bought the property for the little Baptist church over there, for the cemetery. And finally, during the Depression in the 1930s, Ed Vaughan runs off and whatever treasure is left, whatever money's left, blows it in the U.S. and dies destitute in Toronto. Now, when Samuel Ball died in 1846, not only did he own these 9 lots here, which were some of the most expensive real estate in all of Lunenburg County, possibly all of Nova Scotia with the exception of downtown Halifax. He had an island off here, it used to be called Hooks, now it's called Sam's Island. He had a 125-acre farm on the mainland. He was employing a maid for his wife in his house, and he had a servant for himself. Well, what's kind of odd or ironic about the servant is that his last name was Butler. True story. But in order for Isaac Butler to inherit, he was supposed to change his last name to Ball. So not only did Ball will property and money to his family and his servants, but also to people in the community. He was known as a good man. Now, when you called somebody a good man back then, it was a badge of honor. Because people in your community knew that in times of need, in times of want, times of trouble, they could come to you and you would help them. Right? Now, was he hardworking and industrious? There is no question about that. When you think of where he came from to what he amassed, you know, it is in reality a rags to riches story. There is no question about that. It's an amazing story. You could do a TV show just on that, believe me. A couple things that Rutkowski discovered was that in Judge de Brisset's History of Lunenburg County, first published in 1871, in the first edition, Ball is listed as one of the original finders in the money pit. So you got Ball, McGinnis, and Vaughan. But in the second and third edition, Ball's taken out, and Smith is put in. Also, Rutkowski found Ball's will in the archives in Halifax. And when he showed it to me, I had a bit of a chuckle, you know, a little bit of a smile. Because 2 of my ancestors, one on my mom's side and one on my dad's side, were witnesses to Samuel Ball's will. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. Right? And also, Kel Hancock was involved in some of the early episodes in season 1 and 2, who was a direct descendant of the McGinnises. He was writing a book about the McGinnis family, their genealogy. Discovered that one of the Barkhouses actually married into the McGinnises. So I like to tell people that I was predestined to come to Oak. I wish we knew more about Samuel Ball. He is a very interesting character, and I use the term character with the utmost respect. In fact, one of the things we're trying to do with the Interpretive Center, which is a work in progress, by the way, is tell the real story of Oak Island. Not the TV story, not the book story, but the real story. Not only of the searchers, but the people who are living here and how they interacted. And when we find the treasure. And we will, by the way. And we'll tell that story, too. So we're going to go up to our next stop, folks, and continue on. Of the cross, okay? So if the cross was standing upright, it'd be the basis. It's not a solid cross. It's only the points of the cross. Okay? It's made up of 5 cone-shaped granite boulders, ranging in size between 10 and about 18 tons. 18 to 20 tons. From here to the top of the cross is 867 feet. It kind of goes in that direction. It actually extends the other side of the swamp. Each arm of the cross is 360 feet in length. Bang on. Been confirmed by a number of surveyors. First by Fred, who was a surveyor, then by William Crooker, good friend of his, a surveyor for the provincial government, wrote 2 books on Oak Island Quest, Oak Island Gold. And also by Berrigan's out of Bridgewater, and now Steve Guffel, who's a geomatic expert on the show. Another reason to call it a cross is 293 feet up along the stem. There's another boulder, half again the size of this one, and that represents where Jesus' feet were nailed to the cross. Right? The angle between the arms and the stem, one is, I believe, 90 degrees. The other one is very, very close to being 90, to a fraction of 1 degree. Mother Nature's good. She's not that good. Now, where the arms and stem intersect, Fred dug down and about 2 to 3 feet and found not a granite boulder, but a sandstone boulder. And it wasn't cone-shaped. It was flat like a cookie. Right? And when you look at it, and you have to suspend your disbelief here a little bit, you know, use your imagination. You go on the internet,
And you go Nolan's cross, Nolan's headstone, you'll see diagrams, descriptions, photograph. There's one rather ridiculous photo, so just ignore that one. You'll see, if you look at it, what appears to be the chin, what appears to be the mouth, a nostril, an eye socket, because you're looking at it in profile. Right? And in the forehead region, there's an indentation that has been cut into the stone. It is not a geological striation. It is literally cut into the stone where you can lay a short-bladed weapon, possibly used on board ship for close-quarter combat. Now, I heard a story third party a number of years ago. I never got the chance to confirm it with Fred, because whenever I saw him, I always had, umpteen questions for him, and sometimes you just had to pick and choose. And he might not have told me, but at least I could have asked the question, and now I can't. And the story that I heard third party was that when he acquired these lots in 1963 through quitclaim deeds, for a total of $3,200, 7 lots, right? One of the descendants of Anthony Graves, by the last name of Sellers, gave him this rusty old blade that one of their people had found on O'Connell many, many, many years prior. And either by design or by fluke, that blade supposedly fit perfectly into the indentation on the headstone. Now, as I said, never got a chance to confirm it with Fred. Here's the thing. Whatever Fred thought about the cross, he never related to anybody. We don't know. See, a lot of what both of those guys knew was up here. And even though both of them were writing books, but it was up here, not written down. Now, here's the thing. You can't take the cross and kind of correlate it to the money pit, to 10X, to the cave-in pit, to Smith's Cove, or the Stone Triangle, because there's no real connection to that. Now, there may have been something prior that maybe a farmer was building the wall and destroyed, not by design, but by fluke, right? But you can't, there's no connection. So we could be looking at 2 independent treasure sites here, because nobody knew this until Fred came along. I mean, you're walking through the woods and you see, there's a big boulder. Yeah, so what? You know what? There's boulders 5-6 times bigger than that on O'Connell. But because Fred was plotting, every time he found a big boulder, would plot it on a map and saw the pattern, saw the correlation between this, that's when you discovered the cross. You needed to be a surveyor to discover this, and you also needed to plot it on a map. So without Fred finding this, nobody would even know it was here. You'd be walking by, oh yeah, so what? There's all kinds of them here. So, as I said, whatever Fred thought. Now you see there's excavation around it. Anytime Fred or Dan found a boulder or a stone that they thought was interesting, and I'll be quite honest with you, they thought a lot of O'Connell were interesting. They would examine the soil underneath the stone. If it was heavily compacted, then chances are, the stone's been there since the last glacier went through here 10,000 years ago. Right? However, if the soil was disturbed in some way, then either a farmer moved it or somebody placed it there for a reason. This was placed here for a reason. It's too perfect. As I said, Mother Nature's good. She's not that good. So we're going to go over here to the South Cove, folks, and continue. Probes over here, like 12, 15-foot long probes. We could not find bottom. That's why there was a rule. And this was strictly enforced. Castor crew. Nobody went into the swamp by themselves over here. It's very dangerous over there. You could get into a lot of trouble. You go off the plywood, because that's the only way you can maneuver in here, right? Is on plywood. Otherwise, you're going in. And once you've been in it, you never want to go in it again. Because it is the most foul, disgusting, rotten, stinking, you can add any adjective you want. That's the swamp. Now, you see there's an overturned tree there with a root ball on the end, right? Just to the left of that, there's a shaft. In fact, that's part of the peninsula that was driven out in the early 70s by Fred Nolan to dig a shaft right at the end of it. Here's the odd thing. That map that shows this section of the swamp, it's a white space. No peninsula, no shaft, no description. Nothing. We don't know why he did it. Never related to anybody why he did it, but he did it. So just the other side, just to the left of that, you see that birch tree right there, a little bit of a birch. You go back behind that, and then over to the left is where we found in season 1, the Spanish Merovingite dated 1652, which really kind of kicked this whole thing off. Now, the fact that it's Spanish, irrelevant, really. Because back then, if you had a money pouch, you could have Spanish, Dutch, French, English, Portuguese, Scottish, Papal States, Germanic States, and coins in your money pouch, right? Because you knew what the value of those coins were. It's not like you went from one country to the next, turned that in, and got theirs. Didn't happen. Now, the date's very interesting, 1652. Right? In fact, when they had the coin analyzed, it came back that it had been in swamp-like conditions for over 300 years. So that really kind of kicked this whole show off, really. Right? So you see there's a high ridge of bushes back there, right? Well, and if that peninsula wasn't there, it would run right this way. And in front of us, those high reeds. That's where Fred Nolan pointed out to us a series of oak stumps. Now, they're not thrown into the swamp. They're rooted into the swamp. And oak trees, I'm afraid, do not grow in water. One of them is where it was cut off at the butt, is about 2.5 feet across. Massive oak tree. So at some point, that was dry land back there. Right? Now, to give you a couple of theories about the swamp, right? One of them is that this was a cove at one time. Right? Treasure ship or ships were brought in, offloaded of treasure. Maybe one was deconstructed to create the various levels in the money pit. And according to this theory, radiating out from the bottom, like the spokes of a wheel, are treasure caches, all encased in wood from, oak from the ship. A theory. Another theory is that a treasure ship was brought in, was offloaded, and it became grounded. They couldn't get it out, right? They could not get the ship out. So they either burnt the ship or they blew it up. And that may explain what Fred found on the north side of the swamp. In fact, I have photos of this from his old museum. He found a section of a mast of a ship. He found a section of scuppers, right? That's the openings on the deck. So when waves come up inside the ship, right, on the deck, it doesn't stay in, it just rolls off the deck. And he found rat lines, part of the rigging, not in the muck, under the muck, right? Now, you've seen the show, that we found a piece of deck planking, right? Because actually it's in the interpretive center. We found a deck spud. That you could explain away. You say, oh, you know what, there's a hurricane here, it picked up parts of a shipwreck, and it threw it into the swamp. Actually, Tony Sampson's the one who pulled that out. Tony's at Salty Dog Tours over there. And he pulled it out. That you can explain. What you can't explain is what Fred found near the apex. That's a little harder. To use a quote from Edgar Allan Poe in the Purloined Letter, the best place to hide something is in plain sight. Fred Nolan was absolutely obsessed and fascinated with the swamp. Most of his activity was the swamp and the high ground on 13 and 14. When we looked at his entire property, I would say 65 to 75% of his work, and that's my estimate, was concentrated in those three areas. He just was hell-bent, fascinated in the swamp. Now, Rick and I, you see, because we drank the Kool-Aid a long time ago. We absolutely believe there's something in the swamp, right? No one would ever convince us that there isn't. Now, Marty, he's over here on the other end of the spectrum, right? Because Marty, he doesn't like the swamp. And everybody else is kind of in between. Now, there are a number of theorists and historians, including Fred, including Dan, including myself, a number of other people that believe what you've been walking on is either partially or totally man-made to create this. Now, you're just going to have to wait and see what we discover. Anyway, we're going to, sorry? You had a question? Yes, ma'am.
At the end of the last